Hey folks, how's it going? Rob Avis here, just getting into the live chat today. If you're just coming in, please introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from. Would love to know your name and what you're hoping to get out of today's session. So it's Rob Avis here with Verge Permaculture, and today we're going to be talking about design for freedom, the 13 steps to empower yourself with the knowledge to transform your life and your land. Now, the main premise behind this talk or this series of talks was specifically around what I would do differently if I could do it all over again. So I kind of fumbled my way to where I am right now, and it's all turned out great. But I wanted to try and kind of distill down what it was that I did that was really successful so that people can follow those steps if they're looking to go down a similar path. Not necessarily saying that you want to start another Verge permaculture, although you're more than welcome to. You know, we all have our dreams, goals, and desires, passions that we wish to follow. And so I kind of forced myself. I couldn't, once I knew a certain amount, I couldn't go back to the way things were. And so have kind of just fumbled my way here. So anyways, we're going to get into this right away. Before we get started though, and I'll make this mention a couple of times throughout the day, I just have a couple quick announcements. So I just wrote a new blog on Medium called What You Need to Know Before You Build a Solar System. I think that's what it's called, something along those lines. Basically, I get a lot of questions about solar power, and we design solar systems for people, and then we project manage the installation of them as well. And there's a lot of misinformation out there or things that people aren't aware of with regards to solar photovoltaics. And so I'm specifically addressing one specific thing about solar photovoltaics in this blog today. And so the link to that Medium article is in the show notes below. So if you just scroll down to the show notes, you can go and click that right now and head over there after today's show, and you can read it if you're interested in solar photovoltaics. If you do read it and you find it interesting, please hit the clap button and share it on social media. It helps that to track. And I'm really trying to get as much information out this year about renewable energy, off-grid homesteads, resilient homes, acreages, and farms, and permaculture. I mean, that's why I'm on YouTube Live twice a week. I really feel like the world needs this information, and you guys can help spread that information right along with me. So thanks so much for doing that. The other announcement that I wanted to make was that the Passive Solar Greenhouse course is launched. It's going. We've got a ton of people in there right now. The price for that course is going up at the end of this week on April 15th. It's going to go up 200 USD. And so if you're wanting to get in at the lower price, at the founder's price, you're going to want to do that pretty quickly. So I'll make that mention one more time in this show, and then again later on this week. That price is only going to go up as we build more content. The course is going to expand, and people that get in now will get access to all that new content, plus what's already right there right now. It's all professionally recorded, and I'd love to have you in the program. So if you're looking to build a passive solar greenhouse this year, now's a great time to hop in on that, because you can take advantage of the plans, you can take advantage of all my advice, and get going on that. So I've also left a link to that course in the show notes below. Please feel free to head over there and check it out. If you have any questions about passive solar greenhouse design or the course itself, get in touch with me. I'd love to have a chat with you. We can talk about whether or not it's a fit. Okay, so let's get into the content today. Design for Freedom, 13 steps to empower yourself with the knowledge to transform your life and land. And by the way, land can be urban or rural. It doesn't have to be a big farm. You can do most of the stuff that that farmers do right in your own backyard. It's amazing what you can do on a tiny piece of land. So I'm gonna just share my screen here, guys, and we're gonna quickly review what we talked about last time, and then we're going to get into the new content today. I'll make sure I leave some time at the end so you guys can ask any questions that you've got. And while I'm sharing the screen, I don't know if it's possible, but if you've got a social media channel open, just hit share on this video and get a few more people into the chat for us. We'll create a really interesting conversation at the end. I find it very interesting to talk about this stuff, especially when there's a lot of conversation going on amongst people. Also, if you're just getting in, make sure you introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from and what you hope to get out of today's talk. I'd love to know that. So just put that into the chat window. It always makes the conversation a lot more interesting. All right, so last week we talked about my most recent insight, and the most recent insight that I had was when I was in Mexico with my parents. They retired down there, for at least partially retired, so they're there, for 3 to 6 months of the year. And we were talking with a couple who had 2 kids, and they were sailing around the world for 4 years, and it really intrigued me. I was really interested in this concept of sailing, and in spite of the fact that, sailing around the world for 4 years would be amazing, there was something deeper going on there, and I wanted to try and get to the heart of it. And the thing that was deeper was that I had the same kind of emotion about this idea of sailing that I had about permaculture, almost 12 years ago, when I first learned about permaculture. And when I started really thinking about what that was, it was really, it came back down to freedom. I went into permaculture because of freedom. I wanted to be able to grow my own food. I wanted my own energy. I wanted to be in a house that did not need resources from the outside. I wanted to be self-sufficient within a community of individuals that were rowing in the same direction, basically. And so when I was talking to this couple about sailing around the world, that's really what they were expressing to me, was that they wanted to play an extremely large role in their girls' lives. Not that most parents don't play an important role in their children's lives, but the thing that struck me was that they recognized that they needed to get rid of their jobs. They needed to get rid of the 9 to 5. They needed to own all of their time again. And I've told this story a couple of times on YouTube, but I had that same epiphany when I was working in the oil and gas industry, that I only had 600,000 hours on this earth if I was lucky, and that I'd burned through a third of them. So if you take, 8,760 and multiply it times the number of years you think you're going to live, so 8,760 is the number of hours in a year. That's how much life energy you have on the earth. That's the only thing that matters. Money doesn't really matter. You have to have a certain amount of it. If you die with more than you need, then you work too hard. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were pursuing your passion the entire time and money was the result of that. But a lot of people, I find, especially men, struggle from this, work their butts off, then they retire and they're bored as sin. And they don't know what to do when they stop working. And so I've kind of come to the conclusion in my life that I love to work. I love what I do. I wake up excited every morning to go and work, or to spend time with my kids. Like, I try and make sure that all the activities that I'm doing in my life, I'm stoked about, which is more than most people can say, but it's totally attainable by everybody. You just have to make some conscious decisions in your life. And so I work most of the time. It hasn't been like that for the last 3 months, but that's a whole other situation. Sometimes in life, we go through these periods of extreme work. So there's times when we work harder than others, but generally speaking, I work less than I used to work. And I've just kind of come to the conclusion that I'm going to work for the rest of my life. And not because it's some sort of, form of slavery, but because I love it. I love what I do. I love helping people to find their freedom through permaculture. That's what I do for a living. And so I will do that for the rest of my life in some form or another. And so that's what these individuals were speaking to me about, this idea of sailing around the world. And so that's where this idea of creating this 13-part series, or 13 steps, I should say, came from. So hopefully you get some pointers out of it. So last week, what we talked about was, hey, Gabby, how's it going? And by the way, guys, take Gabby's cue here and put your name up into the chat window. Let us know where you're calling in from and what you hope to get out of today's session. So Gabby says, from Southeast Manitoba, and we are currently on a similar journey that Rob and Michelle went through. Hope to learn tricks to shorten that path. Yeah, you guys are well on your way. So really looking forward to watching what happens with you guys, Gabby. You're doing some great stuff out there. Okay, so last time we talked about this life energy we just spoke about. We went on a journey without a map. We spent a lot of time, energy, and money in order to figure this out. So we wanted to help other people to fast track this. And so this series is a distillation of our journey, essentially, hoping to help you guys on your journey. So we talked about establishing your burn rate, reducing it. Hopefully, once you know what you're spending, then you can actually start to make conscientious decisions about what you don't need to spend. We talked about ways to cut your burn rate. And we spoke about how when Michelle and I got started, house sitting was a really big part of what we did in order to reduce the amount of money we were spending. We didn't have any debt because we always lived below our means, but we talked about the importance of not getting into debt. Now, there's good debt and bad debt. One of the things that I've always been really keen on, or at least for the last 10 years, is if you're going to get into debt, if you're going to get into household debt, aka buying a house or a mortgage, most of us, will go out and get a mortgage, and then we pay it. And all we really do is we sleep in the bed in our house. We don't do much more on the property. Sometimes we'll garden it or we'll cut the lawn or whatever. But why don't we require our houses to be business decisions? And so, people will say, well, they are business decisions. We're hoping that the house is going to appreciate, and that's going to be one of our retirement packages or whatever. But what if it doesn't appreciate? Or what if you could find other ways to monetize your home? And so a lot of what we talked about in a permaculture design course is, if you spend $7,000, $6,000 or $7,000 buying organic greens a year to keep your family healthy, why not grow that in your backyard? Why are you, I'm not saying you guys, but why do people spend so much time and money manicuring a lawn that just costs them time and money? When they could be actually doing something productive with that space and saving, $5,000 or $6,000. And by the way, something to keep in mind around all of this that very few people think about is that when you save $1, you're saving more than $1. Okay. This is especially true in solar, but it's true in everything really. Anything that you pay tax on, $1 is more than $1. And what I mean by that is that people say, well, solar doesn't pay for itself because electricity is too cheap. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but how are you paying for that electricity? And the truth of the matter is that you're paying for that electricity with after-tax dollars. Okay, so depending on how much you make will depend on how much more you're saving, but you have to do the economics on after-tax dollars, not on before-tax dollars. So every time you spend $1 on electricity, you're actually spending more than $1 because you've already paid tax on that dollar. And so what I mean by that is that if you can put your money into something that generates, whether it's electricity or food or thermal energy, it's money you don't have to go out into the general economy and produce or earn. And so it's when you translate it to after-tax dollars or and take that into account, it's more than just $1. It's also, let's say you're paying a 25 or 30% tax rate on your money. So it's like 1.3, and that can be translated back into hours of work. And so I'm always amazed at how many people put their money into the stock market, for example, and because their money will appreciate without them doing any work, when they could literally just put a solid state system up onto their roof, solid state meaning no moving parts, and save energy. And that means they don't have to go out into the general economy to make Canadian dollars or American dollars or whatever your currency is, to pay for power that you will need forever. You're not going to ever not need power. And so solar is an example of a technology that I'm a really big fan of, both solar thermal and solar photovoltaic. And really, what is a garden? A garden is just a form of solar collection. Okay, you're basically just taking sun, soil, and water, and you're turning it into food. Well, your body needs to eat all the time as well. So why would you not be producing some of that food? And in producing it, you're going to save the surplus. So you're going to cut your burn rate down. And you're going to, in two ways. So one, you're going to actually, if you think about a garden, people will say, well, gardens don't make any money, which is totally false because there's two things that you're saving there. One, and some people will save more than others depending on how you're currently managing your property. But number one is that you're not having to go out and buy the food, right? So that's the first way that you save. The second way that you save is if you were manicuring your property in the first place, you can cut the expenses on all that manicured stuff. And so that's now directly into your bank account. And all you're getting out is something that you can actually consume. Excuse me. So put that money into something. And so I think from my perspective, one of the best things that we ever did was we tried to have 2 years of money in our bank account. And you know what's interesting is that we're going through a bit of a rough patch right now at Verge. You know, we got de-indexed on Google, which meant that nobody could find us on the internet. Okay, so it's actually meant that, and I'm being a bit vulnerable with you guys here, but it actually meant that we canceled one of our courses in Invermere. Okay, so the course that I would have been teaching right now got canceled because nobody could find us on Google. Totally out of my control. You know, it's like, I don't know why Google decided, or their algorithm decided, that my website was pure spam, but they did. And so as a result of that, nobody knew that we were offering a course. And so we had to cancel it, which meant that we were short cash that we would normally have right now. And the thing is that these things happen, whether it's a death in the family, somebody gets sick, you lose a job, you know, whatever. You can't predict these things. They're impossible to predict. Life will always throw right hooks at you. And so one of the ways that you can create your own insurance policy is by trying to always have a positive amount of cash in your bank. And so we always try and keep 2 years of money in the bank, so that if something like what just happened, or potentially even worse happened, we would be okay. We're resilient to it, at least for a certain amount of time. You can't necessarily insure against everything. And so we always have 2 years of money in the bank account. And that allows us to take more risk in our business, which we can invest into essentially, because, and like, especially when you have kids, knowing that there's enough there. And like, I know the other thing that happens for me when I'm thinking about my business, and when I know that I've got money in the bank, is that I'm not interested in working for people I don't want to work for. I only work for people that I'm stoked to work for. I'm only stoked about working for people that have similar goals and projects that I'm excited to work on. And knowing that I don't need to take on work that I have to take on work in order to pay the bills, essentially, makes it very profound in terms of how I sell a job. Now I'm not trying to force something onto somebody. I'm more just trying to see if it fits, essentially. And if it fits and it feels good, I mean, it means that, like, when I'm talking to my clients about all of this stuff, they're not ever feeling forced into a project, because I'm just expressing how I think I can help them, and they're expressing how they think they need help. And if there's a match between how I think I can help them and how they need help, then we do a project together. And if there isn't, I almost always have a suggestion for them with regards to how they can solve their particular problem. So having that money in the bank means that I'm a better business person. I'm more ethical. Not that I wouldn't be an ethical person otherwise, but you can imagine what it feels like if you are in a business and you've got a giant payment coming up that you don't know where the money is going to come from. You'll take on any project because you don't have a backstop, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in a business or not, having that backstop is really important, because it makes you better. It makes you plan, it makes you think about things. And so I think that this is a really, really important step. And the only way you can get a surplus is by cutting the burn rate or generating more money. And because this ultimately is about capturing our life energy and working towards things that make you excited, and not working on things that you're not excited to work on, which there will inevitably always be little things that you don't want to do. But as you start moving down this path, you start finding that there's fewer and fewer of those types of things. You start getting more and more control over the types of stuff that you want to do. And so it's the problem with all of this stuff, guys, is that as you go down this path, I'm going to ruin you, unfortunately, because it becomes harder and harder to go back to the way things were. And, you know, there's always that possibility. That was another thing that we did, was we made sure we had our professional designation. We made sure that all the jobs that we left on really high terms. There is always a possibility that I might have to go back and get a job. That's always a possibility. And I've made sure that I've kept that a possibility, because what if I mess up, I burned through my 2 years of money, and I need to go do something, like being a professional engineer, and it doesn't matter what your profession is, whether you're a trade or a professional engineer, or you're really good at any number of skills. There's always options. There's always things that you can invest in to make sure that you have a third backstop, essentially. So I'm not opposed to getting a job if I ever had to, but it'll be the last option that I engage in the event that something goes wrong. And so really being conscientious and strategic about the decisions that you make, so that you always have a way of getting back and being secure, essentially. And once you have these backstops, the worry disappears. It's the same kind of mentality that I talk about with my clients that are preppers. So I have a lot of people that come to me that are worried about the state of the world. And I've been there. I know what that feels like. I know how terrifying it is to be concerned about these things. And that concern is not actually about the state of the world. It's about an individual's inability to know what to do should a crisis occur, whether it's water, energy, power, food. It's not the actual crisis itself. It's that they feel trapped or hopeless because they're lacking some knowledge in a specific area. And so one of the best things that you can do if you're in that scenario and you feel that anxiety, whether it's a job or whether it's about the state of the world, is to train yourself, is to educate yourself, is to teach you the skills that will help you to manage those issues should they arise. And so that's really all a permaculture design course is it's kind of teaching you about how the world works so that you can engage it in a positive way and not in a way that's based in fear, essentially. So all of these things are about investing in options, and a lot of the options generally end up being around knowledge. And so once you've got a base of money, it doesn't have to be a large amount, because if you can have a little bit of money and then you can cut your burn rate down, then you don't need to generate more money. And so knowledge is the thing that actually will appreciate if you invest into it. But before you invest in knowledge, the other thing that I think is really, really crucial is getting healthy. Now, I left a cake factory when I came to Calgary with my wife. My parents had a 40,000 square foot cheesecake facility, and I know now for sure that I was hypoglycemic when I left that cake factory. I'm amazed that I was not actually less healthy than I was. But Michelle had to carry around grumpy pills, which were basically just candies, because I would get hangry. When I got hungry, I would be unable to think because I was so hungry. Like, it would affect my brain function. And I had a bunch of other health issues as well that I've actually made a video on. The sound is really crappy on it. I'm not going to get into it on this one, but I'll probably do another video on that because this continues to evolve. But basically, the doctors couldn't tell me what was wrong with me, essentially. I had every test known to man. And I should probably just talk about it. 50% of the population deals with this issue, but everybody's scared of talking about it. So I had problems with my gut, basically. I was having all sorts of issues. They thought that I might have cancer. They thought that I had all sorts of internal gut issues. I was having all the symptoms. So I had all sorts of scopes and investigations. It all came back negative, which is great, but I still had the gut issues and I couldn't figure it out. And nor could the doctors. They could not sort out the issue. And so I get made fun of because I'm constantly hacking my diet. I'm constantly making adjustments and changes. I feel like my body is the ultimate laboratory. And so I do all sorts of stuff to try and constantly hack my my diet and improve my overall health and condition. And so this is the most recent thing, probably in the last year. I've been playing around with this, and I've really gotten serious about this in the last month. But I eat once a day. I eat one meal per day, and I'm eating mostly a paleo/keto type diet. So pretty high on the fat, low on the protein, high on the greens. And I eat basically from about 3:30 in the afternoon until about 6:30 at night. And this has been transformative. So out of all of the stuff that I did, I was able to control the issues that I was having with my gut and actually reverse them, in my opinion, just by cutting out, as Owen's talked about, cutting out sugar, cutting out carbohydrates, drinking more water. I added something into my diet called resistant starch, which made a really big difference. And I can leave a link to that for you guys. Or if you just Google free the animal here, I'll put it into the chat window here. Free the animal. And then resistant starch. There's a great blog on that website. I highly recommend it. That made a huge difference for my gut. And you'll understand once you read that what was going on. So that made a big difference. And then, but I still, up until recently, was constantly getting tired through the day, and I, could never figure it out. I wasn't sure if it was because I had kids, or I wasn't sleeping properly through the night. And so I have recently only started in the last probably month eating once a day, and then I'm trying to fast for 3 days a month. Okay, so basically at the beginning of the month, what I try and do is I try not to eat for 3 full days. And it's not actually that hard. Once you get to eating once a day, then eating once after 3 days is actually really easy, especially if you can cut the carbs out. So no more potatoes, no more bread, no more sugar. And so now that I eat once a day, which means I don't have cream in my coffee in the morning, I'll basically wake up at 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, something like that, drink a coffee, some water, brush my teeth, go to work, till my kids wake up, feed them breakfast. Then either Michelle or myself take the kids. And then we usually switch off halfway through the day. I'll lift, I won't eat till about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I'll eat as much as I want till my eating window is done. So usually from 3 to 6 is when I consume. I don't count calories, none of that stuff. And I don't get tired anymore. I don't get any sleepiness whatsoever. And so what I've realized is that eating is actually consuming enormous amounts of my internal energy, in the process of digestion, basically. So by not eating, I feel like I have 10 times more energy, which is really ironic. I'm not bulimic or anorexic or anything like that. Like, I'm not counting calories. I can eat as much as I want during that window. And I've lost weight. And the other interesting thing is that I'm still lifting weight. I power lift. So I power lift 2 to 3 times a week. I lift enormous amounts of weight when I'm lifting. I go to a special gym in town here. It's not very expensive. And so I'm actually bulking up. I'm getting more muscular. My posture is better. And as you lift weight, you build muscle. As you build muscle, you burn any kind of sugars that might be in your muscle, which are called glycogen. As those glycogen levels come down, then the receptors in your muscles open up and they can receive more sugar. And so by lifting weight, eating once a day, and trying, when I do eat, to eat very few carbs, I'm not spiking my insulin anymore. And so my blood sugar levels are really low, and insulin is one of the most inflammatory hormones that our body produces. And it's a very important hormone. But by keeping my insulin levels down, my brain clarity has gone up, and everything's just better. And so I'm convinced that humans eat too much. We don't lift enough weight, and it creates all sorts of problems. So there's actually a video that if you Google eating once a day, there's an image that I've got up there right there. Highly recommend watching this video. It's super informative. The guy who made it did a really good job of this, and it's a great little pathway to get you into eating once a day. If you think that eating once a day is crazy, I don't blame you. I've been down that path. Try eating twice a day. Try eating at lunch and at dinner. So at noon and at 5 o'clock, and then don't eat anything else, and see how that feels. Try that for a month. If you like it, then slowly push your lunch back to about 3 o'clock, and then you're eating once a day. It's actually not that hard. But if you're eating lots of carbohydrates, if you're drinking beer, if you're drinking wine, this is going to be very difficult to do. And so you need to cut those sugars out, because sugar actually creates enormous hunger pangs, essentially. So if you can cut the sugar out, you'll find that this is a lot easier. I highly recommend growing a garden. So gardens, of course, produce good food. One of the things that people don't talk about much in a garden, and one of the main reasons to grow a garden, is actually if you're not using herbicides and pesticides on the plants, these plants are covered in microorganisms, okay? Now, we want to grow this food in healthy soil, And then we want to eat it raw every once in a while, because when you eat raw vegetables from your own garden, you're actually re-inoculating your gut microbiome. Okay, so we want to actually be populated with the microbes that live in our biome. That's how we locally adapt. So the reason to grow a garden is actually it's your cheapest and best source of probiotics to repopulate your gut. The other thing that you want to do is, if whatever you're not producing in your own garden, and keep the comments coming, guys. Make sure you introduce yourself. There's 30 of you guys on here, so make sure you introduce yourself. Let us know where you're calling in from, and anything to do with what we're talking about right now, put it up into the chat window, okay? If what's coming out of my mouth sounds interesting, put the press the like button down below, the thumbs up. That's awesome. And let's keep chatting about this. So anyways, eating local is really important. And on Fridays, I'm doing a series right now called Eating the Way Nature Intended, specifically around eating context-specific diets. Now, when we eat local, there's all sorts of benefits that happen. Number one, and probably the most important thing, is that we support our local economy, as well as we can, by supporting our local economy, we can actually create relationships with our farmers. So we can determine whether they can be trusted, essentially, and we only buy food from people we trust, which means that we're going to eliminate the herbicides and the pesticides. You know, there's a doctor in Hawaii who's now saying that celiac might actually be a disease of glyphosate or Roundup. Again, growing up in a bakery, before we had a cake factory, we actually had a bread factory and a pie factory, and like we've made every possible bakery product you can imagine. I can tell you this: when when a baker grinds flour, and if you're grinding whole wheat flour, you don't wash the grain before you grind it. Okay, it goes straight into the grinder, and then from the grinder it goes into, you add water, you add yeast, you add some sugar, and you ferment it. And so if you're eating non-organic wheat right now and whole grain, you are getting a daily dose of Roundup every single day, because a lot of wheat now is grown and sprayed with Roundup right at the end of its life, so that the entire field gets killed at the exact same time. So they'll spray that whole field. It desiccates the wheat, so it kills it off because it's a herbicide. Then the grain dries standing, then they come out and they combine it. Now the combine picks up the kernels of grain, which has the husks on it. The husks are covered in Roundup. That then goes to the mill or to the baker. The baker grinds it, puts it into your bread. And so one of the best things you can do is, I mean, just eliminate gluten. But if you have to eat gluten, make sure it's organic, make sure it's husk free. Don't eat whole grain bread. And there's lots of other reasons for that too. But you want to get rid of the herbicides and pesticides. Now, they've done studies on women where they looked at women who only ate organic food and women who ate non-organic food, and they tested the breast milk to see if they could find Roundup in the breast milk. And it didn't matter whether they were organic or not organic, there was Roundup in both sets of women. Now, I'm sure the concentrations were different, but we want, you know, you can't get rid of it. It's persistent. It's in the ecosystem now. We've spread it everywhere. Your best chance for eating herbicide-free food is to grow as much of it as you possibly can in your own backyard. And then try and cut out the stuff that is more susceptible to having it on there, and then eat locally from farmers you trust, essentially. So this is really important. The only things that actually will make you live longer and give you more life hours is by eating less, so cutting your caloric intake. You can go Google this and you'll find that in that video that I sent you, Eating Once a Day. So cutting your caloric intake down and allowing your body to basically consume all of the energy that you had the day before, and lifting really heavy weight. Okay, so when you put your body under a certain amount of stress, it has to be eustress. So there's distress, stress, and eustress. So eustress is positive in that you've got the dosage right. So when you lift heavy weight and you cut caloric intake through something like intermittent fasting or just fasting in general, you live longer. Just one more little thing to think about is that they've Cancer is now being called a disease of metabolism by some. There's actually two diseases I want to talk about. Cancer is one of them. I'll talk about the other one in a second. And so what happens is with cancer cells actually have a dysfunctional mitochondria, which is the little tiny powerhouse in all of our cells that generate energy. And so because it's dysfunctional, these mitochondria can only burn sugar. So when you go into a fast, a 3-day fast, or you intermittent fast every day, you're basically telling your body that you want it to burn fat and move into ketosis. And so what you do is you actually weaken any cancer cells. So it's actually a form of kind of preventative maintenance on your body, essentially, to reduce any kind of cancer that's forming. And there's lots and lots of documentation on this. You can go and look at a guy named Dom D'Agostino. He's a researcher from Florida. He's done a ton of research on ketosis-based diets and cancer. Super interesting stuff. The other disease is Alzheimer's. And so Alzheimer's now is being called type 3 diabetes, which basically means that your brain has become insulin resistant. So you really have to get the insulin down in your body. And the way to do that is through fasting and cutting out the carbohydrates, or at least keeping them lower. So yeah, grass-fed kefir, totally, Kevin, awesome. It's totally a superfood. And basically you're giving yourself a probiotic pill every single day. Kefir is just loaded with beneficial microbes. So Frankie asks, what's your take on the China study? So Frankie, I've read it, and that book made me vegan after I read it. And then I started to dig a little bit deeper, and I think that book is not actually correct from a research perspective. There's a lot of information missing that it's just not, and it's not true. I do think we need to eat a lot of vegetables. That's the part that I think is totally correct. But I think his whole take on milk and meat causing all the diseases that he talks about in there are just not true. I think that if you looked at where the meat and milk comes from, that will make a difference in terms of whether or not it'll be healthful or not healthful. I also think that generally we consume too much protein. When you look at some of the ketogenic stuff, humans are only supposed to consume about 0.5 gram of protein per body mass per day. So for me, that's about 100 grams, which really isn't very much. I mean, it's a tiny little deck of cards of protein. So, and most people don't know this, but protein will actually turn into sugar if you consume beyond your daily dosage. So if you've cut all the sugar out and you're still not able to lose weight, you're probably eating too much protein. Fat is actually the macronutrient that we need to eat more of, and it needs to come from animal products or not animal, depending on where you live in the planet. So if you live in the subtropics and tropics, you can consume fats from plant-based sources. If you're eating in the northern hemisphere, then those fats are generally going to come from animal-based products. Those animals need to be eating a healthy diet that is correct for them. So when we look at the anatomical makeup of a pig or a cow or a chicken, they all have different dietary requirements. Like, for example, the thing that drives me nuts is that chickens are not vegetarian. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy eggs and it says vegetarian eggs or eggs from chickens that are fed a vegetarian diet, those are not healthy chickens. Those chickens are omnivores. They should be consuming bugs. They should be eating carrion. They should be eating all sorts of omnivorous type foods. They can eat grain. That's not the problem. The problem is that for them to have a balanced diet, they need a green pick, they need some meat, they need some fat, they need some seeds. That's what a chicken's supposed to eat. Pigs, same thing. They're omnivores. They're not supposed to eat a vegetarian-based diet. They should be having a variety of different foods based on what their ecosystem produces. Cows are not meant to eat grain. And that's where that whole cowspiracy thing comes from. People have this ignorance around what cows are supposed to eat and where they're supposed to live. They're not supposed to live in feedlots, and they're not supposed to eat grain. They're supposed to eat grass. And so when you eat animals that have, or at least the products that animals produce, that have been fed properly with the right care and attention, they all of a sudden become superfoods. And so that's why eating local from farmers that you can trust is so important. Or if you don't have that in your ecosystem, then you need to produce it on your own if you want to eat healthy food. So to write a book called The China Study saying that all humans are supposed to be vegetarian, the only way you can do that as a scientist is if you ignore all the anthropological evidence, if you ignore all of a lot of medical evidence, and if you cherry pick specific pieces of information in order to try and create a hyper-biased case. So humans are omnivorous. That is one of the things that has defined us and allowed us to be so successful on this planet. And so that means that our bodies are able to adapt. That's why we've been able to live through ice ages and through ups and downs. We are definitely have some hunting characteristics about us, and we are definitely set up to burn fat and to be able to eat protein. And so I think that we have to be very careful about reading diet books, which is why I wanted to create a series called Context-Specific Diets. And we're going to continue that on Friday at 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time on this channel. So if you're interested in that, show up on Friday and we can talk more about diet. Vitamin D is also a really big thing. And actually, thanks for bringing that up, Tim. Most of our meat is grown inside factories, which is what I think you're talking about there. And so if you're not consuming animals that grow outside, this is probably one of the leading reasons why we're all vitamin D deficient, is because the food we're eating is vitamin D deficient. So our animals should be grown outside so that they can accumulate fats, which is one of the reasons why I buy my pigs from Dakota. Dakota produces outdoor hogs. And because he's feeding his animals fat, his pigs specifically, they get dairy fat and whatever other fats that he can get a hold of. You have a very, very healthy animal there, and it will make healthy children and healthy adults and everything else. So you need to know your farmer if you want to know your food. So no farmer, no food. There's a funny bumper sticker that you guys have probably seen in the States that says that. So KNOW, I'll just put it into the yeah, I get where you're coming from, Frankie. I've been there, but do some research, read some other stuff. I have this rule in my life that I need to read something at least once a year that I disagree with. I need to challenge my limiting beliefs, and the only way I can do that is by trying to find information that's contrary to what I believe, and that's the only way you can know whether you're being directed by your biases or not. And so I highly recommend reading something that, like The Vegetarian Myth, as an example, is a great book by Lierre Keith. And you'll figure it out on your own. You don't need me to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. But just try and challenge your beliefs. Read both sides of the argument before you make one decision on everything. Okay, so lift weight, eat less, eat local, grow a garden, and ditch sugar and carbohydrates in general, or at least reduce them. I also pretty much don't drink anymore. I have the occasional beer here or there, or the occasional glass of wine. I've noticed, though, as I've gotten older, that the more, like if I have more than 2 glasses of any kind of alcohol before I go to bed at night, I can't sleep. So that's my body telling me it's time to just be done with booze. I think that it's really important to be conscientious and observe your own internal patterns with regards to what you should and shouldn't be eating. The next step, and we'll just close out with this today, and then you guys can ask some questions if you've got any, and I can go back into some of the questions that you guys have put up here. But educate yourself. Learning is the most valuable thing that you can do. It's the most resilient thing you can do, and it addresses the concerns that you have inside. Like if you are concerned about peak oil, well, go learn about energy. If you're concerned about diet, well, go learn about growing food. If you're learning about food security, learn to grow food. A lot of our anxieties come from a lack of knowledge or ignorance. And I mean that in a ignorance in the most positive way, in the sense that you just don't know what you don't know, essentially. So you got to get to the root of what you're concerned about and then start to move out from there. And so we traveled for many years to learn about the issues that we were confronting or learning about. And the more we learned, the more secure we felt. And in fact, the learning journey never stops. We're still learning. We're still reading books. We're still watching documentaries. We're always learning. And I think that's another thing that makes a healthy mind. And so the thing that really kind of got us when we got back from all of our travels was that we took a permaculture design course. That was the thing that completely changed the course of my life. And that was the thing that made me realize that it didn't matter what was thrown at me. I was going to have a really good chance of being able to figure out what it was I had to do in order to create more resilience in my life. So that was my personal insight. It may not be a fit for everybody, but that's why I teach it. I decided to start teaching a permaculture design course because it helped me so much in my life. And I wanted to be responsible or help other people to guide them to have similar insights in their own. And I recognized that it was only through these insights, maybe not necessarily always through a permaculture design course, but people have to have their own insights. They have to figure things out for themselves. That's where the change occurs. You can't force somebody to change, but if you provide them with the right information at the right time, they can make those decisions on their own. The other thing that's really interesting about permaculture and what I was really attracted to it by is that there's no guilt. You know, we find ourselves in this 21st century, in an incredible time to live, really. But with that incredible time comes incredible consequences and risks and all of the other stuff. And change doesn't happen overnight. And we shouldn't be feeling guilty about it. And we shouldn't feel bad about it. Every day we take one small step. And when you look back after a year, you'll realize that you took 365, and it's a really far distance to walk, especially if those small steps, are making steps towards where that ultimate end goal actually ends up being. So just start taking a small step. It could be as simple as buying organic greens the next day, or planting some kale in your backyard garden or on your deck. Sorry, my nose is really itchy again today. So you just take a small step. And the thing is don't guilt other people into making those changes either. We need to make things taste better. It needs to be more fun and more appealing to go in this direction than the conventional one. And I can tell you from where I stand right now that I've never had better food. I've never owned more of my time. I've never spent more time with my wife and my children, although I've always been working at this job since having children, so I can't really compare. But I'm not saying you need to quit your job and start your own. Your journey is your journey, but at least hopefully as a result of these conversations, you're thinking about the only resource that you actually own is your time. And if you're not spending your time in the way that you want to be spending it, then you should be asking yourself what has to change as a result of that, and what you have to do to start reclaiming some of that life energy. Because once it's gone, it's gone. I have this 86-year-old mentor. He's a mechanical engineer, and I love him dearly because he says one thing to me every time we go for lunch together, and it's like, you've got the rest of your life to work, Rob, and he's still working. You don't have the rest of your life to be with your children. And every time he says that to me, he tempers my ambition just a little bit. And, he's so right. Like at the end of his life, he's at the sunset of his life. We all need to have elders in our life. We all need people that have seen more than we have, that can provide us with what it looks like at the top of the mountain. So I highly recommend that too. And that's not part of my 13-step process, but go get yourself an 80-year-old mentor, somebody that's seen more than you have. And you'll be amazed at the kind of wisdom that they share with you. And they'll be amazed at and happy about having young people in their life. They need young people just like we need old people. Or old people is not the right way to say it. Basically, elders. Okay, guys, so I'm just going to go back through the questions. We've got a few minutes left before we close out the lunch hour here. And if you have any questions, by all means, put them into the chat window. If you found this useful, hit the like button down below. It helps my channel to grow and more people to get this message. If you want to support the program, there's a donation button in the live notes below. You're welcome to do that. Thank you, everybody who has sent me donations. I really, really appreciate it. Definitely motivates me to get on YouTube live when I receive those. So thank you so much. If it's not possible for you, I totally get it. Just hit the like button. That's great too. Okay, so let's just go back to some of the comments here. Okay, so we had Holly from El Paso. Awesome. Frankie's here. Timmy joined from Manitoba. Had to schedule some self-directed time for the kids. Homeschooling. Yeah, totally. Us, we homeschool too. And from Wales. Welcome, Wales and Anne. A quick sis. Hello from South Africa. Living in Europe. Recognized you from your rocket stove video. Oh, thanks. Did not eat once a day, no problem, or did eat once a day, no problem, but I did not lose. Well, you know, you have to, there's two things there. When you eat once a day, you need to cut the carbs as much as you can. And then once a week, you actually should go back to eating 3 meals a day, as weird as that sounds. So what happens is if you eat once a day for too long, your metabolism starts to slow down because your body's adapting. So if you want to bring your metabolism back up, you should have a cheat day once a week. So go and eat whatever you want for that day, and then go back to eating once a day after that, and you'll notice some difference. And then lift weight, put some weightlifting into your diet. Frankie, like Jake Mace, he has been vegan for over a decade now, currently growing 200 plus plants in his yard, Phoenix, Arizona, and has a seed company. Cool. Timmy, regarding glyphosate and gluten intolerance, I can't post a link, but Google glyphosate pathways to modern disease, celiac, sprue, and gluten intolerance. Excellent article. Okay, thanks so much, Tim. Appreciate it. Kevin from Ireland, organic dairy farmer tries. Oh yeah, we talked about kefir earlier. Then Frankie asked about the China study. Holly then says the fermentation process requires bacteria. Eating sauerkraut or kimchi colonizes the intestines with those bacteria and enables the intestines to produce serotonin, which is the happy chemical. Yeah, totally, Holly. You're totally right. Eat lots of fermented food. It's so good for you. And when you ferment food, especially that's grown in your own garden, those are going to have your indigenous microbes from your ecosystem. Okay, Frankie, have you ever heard of Eric Marcus Vegan, The New Ethics of Eating? I have not, but I'd be interested in seeing it, Frankie. By all means, send it off to me. Jade, thank you for your Get Healthy info. Yeah, no problem. Okay, Owen agreed with regards to the China study. Tim, one of my friends here with a severe non-celiac gluten intolerance found that she could eat my sourdough bread made with organic wheat. Don't know exactly why, but she's a fan. Well, might have to do with the glyphosate. Okay, Tim, recently learned that we talked about that. That was regard to vitamin D and animals being grown in farms, specifically in barns, I should say, barns on farms. Field B, Rob, has bakery yeast had to have been modified over the years because of the increasing amounts of glyphosate on the grain? Probably, but the other interesting thing is that if you look at wheat, modern wheat today, it has a much higher protein content, which is the gluten, than it did 100 years ago. So we're eating like grains that have much higher gluten in it. And the reason we do that is we get a much better rise on our bread. So when you have that glue in the bread, then the yeast, then when it's producing CO2, will get a much bigger rise. So bakers really love high gluten wheat strains, and the farmers have accommodated them. Okay, so what about honey? Freegan Dave Hartman. So yeah, I mean, honey is a form of sugar. And so if you eat honey, your body will respond with insulin. So I still eat honey once in a while. I just don't eat a lot of it. And I eat it rarely. And in fact, I don't really even eat very much fruit. I eat fruit when it's coming out of my ecosystem. So another really good book to read is Pandora's Seed. It turns out that humans before the agricultural revolution would only have fruit in their ecosystem for a few months of the year. And so sugar is highly addictive. The reason it's highly addictive is it's a survival mechanism. So when sugar is available in fruits in your ecosystem, just like the same way that bears get really hungry and grumpy when the berries come, they're grumpy because they want to get as many berries into their body as possible to store as much fat as they possibly can in order to survive the winter. So the body of the bear detects the insulin, which then goes into fat storage mode. The fat then piles onto the bear, and then when they go into hibernation, they'll live the whole winter. Well, humans are the same way. So when we get sugar, our body sends a hunger signal to our brain and says, eat more, eat more, eat more. That's why sugar is so addictive, or pasta, or any of the carbohydrates. And essentially what's going on is our bodies are being told that it's fruit season. And so when you start consuming carbohydrates, your body stores fat. And the thing is that when we started growing with an agricultural modality 12,000 years ago, most of the crops we were growing were carbohydrate based. And so as a result of that, our bodies got a signal saying that we were in the largest fruit harvest of all time. And since we've kind of become more sedentary and we're still eating the carbohydrates, we're all becoming hyper obese. So we have to think about the signals that our bodies are receiving from the food that we consume, which is why we should not necessarily eat one diet 12 months of the year, which is why I say I'm vegan in the spring, I'm vegetarian in the kind of late spring and summertime, and then I'm omnivorous towards the end of the summer, and then I'm carnivorous through the winter. So we should cycle our bodies based on what our ecosystems produce, is my personal opinion. You may not disagree with that. That's okay. Nick, one key issue in finding accurate science to support the books, etc. you read. Studies can be designed to get the results you want. It's sad. Science seems to be watered down these days. Absolutely. We have, I know somebody that's working for the Gates Foundation, and that's definitely the case. Science is funded now for specific outcomes, unfortunately. And so Nassim Taleb talks a lot about this, and a lot of the negative stuff that comes. So if you're trying to do science for a specific outcome and you receive negative information towards that outcome, as you're trying to find specific outcomes, you have failures in your experiments, the failures get thrown out. And it's the failures that actually teach us more about science than the successes, which is a bit ironic. So Nassim Taleb talks about how if we actually analyze the failures, we would be much further along in science than if we just cherry pick all the successes. Okay, Owen, sounds like The Primal Blueprint, great book to get people started on changing your lifestyle. Suggest all those things. Great. Timmy, totally agree about reading what we don't agree with. This permits us to connect with people who aren't already part of our personal choir. We need diversity in our perspective and relationships. Totally, Tim. Too many echo chambers. Yeah, thanks. I agree with you. Okay, so let's see here. Just keep going through these questions. We're almost at the bottom here, guys, and then we'll call it a lunch hour. So Tim says, you can't scare people into positive change any more than you can coerce someone into learning against their will. Absolutely. Right, my grandmother is 84 years old and still doing most. Oh, great. That's awesome, Frankie. Owen, this was time well spent. Thanks, Rob. Oh, you're totally welcome. Glad you got something out of it, Owen. Freegan Dave says, primitive earth skills gathering have a lot of elders to look up to. Frankie says, I homeschool too. Fieldby, is that black box on the green Volkswagen van a rocket stove Vanagon heater? No, but close. So that Vanagon ran on vegetable oil. And so that was my pumping infrastructure. That's where I'd pull up to the fryer at the back, and there was a 12-volt pump in there, and I'd fill my tank with their used fryer oil. So not far off. Okay, so Frankie, what region are you from? Oh, Bruno. Okay, Pandora's Seed. Yeah, really good book. Okay, just gonna keep going through here, try and get to the bottom. Okay, so I think I'm at the bottom here. Okay, well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. If you got something out of the video, hit the like button. Please share this on social media. It helps me spread my word all over the place. And we're really trying to build up our web traffic with the loss of traffic that we had from Google there. So you guys can help us out with that. We will continue this conversation on next Monday. There's a few more parts left to it. And I'll see you guys on Friday. If you are interested in the Passive Solar Greenhouse course, the price is going up on Sunday this week, April 15th at midnight. So if there's still time to get in on that course at the lower price. And if you're looking for an article on solar, I just wrote one on Medium. The link is in the show notes below, as well as the Passive Solar Greenhouse course link is in the show notes below as well. So thanks again, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day and an amazing week. And we'll see you guys all on Friday, hopefully. Okay, adios.